What is on your radar, Kim?
Well, Glenn Beck was on Tucker Carlson's show last week touting what has been called a right-wing conspiracy theory and discussing his new book, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism.
It explains why the schools are tracking with the DOJ, why Fauci with the vaccine mandates, why Fauci is hiding his relationship with big pharmaceutical, our gas prices, the First Amendment rights, the January 6th people being set up by the FBI. All of this, Tucker, this is the most important book I have read. This is the most important, or that I've written, this is the most important topic of my career, and I think this is the most important topic in the world today. The Great Reset is not a conspiracy theory. It is something that the Davos people have put together along with the World Economic Forum.
Okay, well, maybe that all sounds a little bit loony, and believe me, I do think Glenn Beck tends to be a loon, but maybe this isn't such a crazy conspiracy theory after all. And after seeing everything we've seen with the governments enacting all sorts of authoritarian controls and many other conspiracy theories coming true, maybe there's something to be concerned about. So what is the Great Reset? The name even sounds conspiratorial, but believe it or not, it's a real thing. The Great Reset started off as the name of a meeting held by the World Economic Forum in the summer of 2020. The World Economic Forum began in the 70s. It's basically a club made up of world leaders, corporations, and other wealthy elites. Every year, they get together in Davos, Switzerland, and pontificate about how to best manage the world and solve problems. This year, the meeting starts today. However, due to the pandemic, like last year, the winter in-person Davos meeting has been postponed to summer, and instead they'll be hosting the meetings this week online. And the conference kicks off today with a special opening speech by China's Xi Jinping. But basically, think of it as a bunch of hoity-toities getting together in a bougie ski resort town to make connections, rub elbows, collaborate. Sometimes world leaders make some peace and prevent war, which is a good thing. Sometimes people will fundraise money for causes, which is also a good thing. But mostly it's a way for elites and world leaders to get together and scheme up new ways to march us towards a more globalized world. Ideas like NAFTA were born in Davos at their annual meeting. Now, the Great Reset is the name of one of those meetings, and it's since turned into an entire agenda with its own microsite attached to the main World Economic Forum website. And the founder of the World Economic Forum has even written a book titled The Great Reset. So it's very real. Now, the idea is the COVID pandemic has been so disruptive, it's exposed social, political, and economic weaknesses in the Western world. They claim COVID exposed breakdowns in a variety of sectors, from healthcare to education to finance to energy. They claim Western capitalism is the root cause of these issues, and a serious overhaul, a reset of the system is needed. Never mind the fact that most of the disruption was actually caused by governments shutting down businesses, societies, and schools, and now going a step further and telling people they must be vaccinated numerous times over in order to participate in the economy and society. Governments, no matter what their intentions have been, whether you think it's good or bad, they are the reason for the disruptions. But the Great Reset says either way, it's an opportunity to rebuild society in a way the global elites see best fit. Now, one thing that really stands out is that they're very vague about what this reset means or even looks like. They just insist it will be good for us. And because the reset blatantly blames Western capitalism, we see a lot of right-wing outlets such as Fox News and Breitbart going after the Great Reset, claiming it's ushering in socialism or communism. But as Glenn Beck mentioned later on in his interview with Tucker, he says he was wrong, that it wasn't about socialism or communism, that it's more about enacting a form of government similar to China's. And what does that mean exactly if it doesn't mean communism? Well, it means that you would own nothing. Everything would be owned by, most likely, one of the many World Economic Forum partner corporations, and you would have no privacy. Take a look at this video published in 2016 on the World Economic Forum's Facebook page. That you'll own nothing and you will be happy. That's what they're saying. With inflation sky high and no signs of it slowing down, they might be right. We are on our way to becoming a nation of renters. But don't worry, it's nothing to fear, just the opposite, says Bloomberg, if you remember this story. Bloomberg, by the way, is one of the hundreds of partners with the World Economic Forum. And they list all of their partners on their website. Other partners include NBC, Google, New York Times, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Apple, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, and many, many others. On top of the idea we're just going to have to move towards the sharing economy, the elites have discussed eradicating paper money, making all transactions traceable. We've talked about the proposed plan for the IRS to audit all bank accounts with accumulation of $600 in annual deposits. Well, they've used the fear of global and domestic terrorism to justify and even make popular things like surveillance and censorship. They're limiting our ability to work, get an education, travel, and even enjoy life on the premise of bringing us safety. They're turning us against one another, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, right versus left, getting us to ban and cancel one another, ushering in a sort of organic social credit system. And my guess is many people would welcome a big tech or government-controlled social credit scoring system in the same vein as what has been rolled out in China. This would ensure they are only sharing restaurants and movie theaters with other do-gooders like themselves. But don't worry, everything is being done under the premise that this is all good for our own. This is all being done for our own good, the benefit of a collective society, and we will be happy. So what's really interesting about this Great Reset is the book that Klaus Schwab wrote. He's the founder of the World Economic Forum. He really goes into, if you read the book, it's pretty dystopian. And there's some really good ideas. People read it and they say, well, I agree with this. I agree that we need an overhaul to our healthcare system. I agree that we need an overhaul. We need to really focus on global warming. But the solution that him and these other elites have come up with is a very globalized economy, a globalized world, and one that lacks privacy, that lacks ownership, one that lacks many of the things that many of us find, many of us hold dear. They're saying, no, we got to get rid of that if we want to reset. And what's even more, I think, misleading about the Great Reset and the solution is they say, they blame it on capitalism. They say, well, it's Western capitalism that's the problem. But their solution is sort of more capitalism. I mean, they call it stakeholder capitalism. But it's just basically corporations will own everything. And they're saying there's got to be a merging between private and public sectors, and that the corporations will own everything and run most things. And then we're just going to have to, be beholden to them, to the banks and these corporations. And so it's really vague what this reset is, but this is why it's so alarming. And then when they run commercials like what they've run and they say all of these things, I mean, you can understand why people then look at this and say, what the heck is this? And then it kind of turns into what seems conspiratorial, but I don't know. They're not really helping the cause. I mean, they're kind of giving fuel to the flame, right?
They sure are. But I think the best way to think of Davos is as a branding convention for the global oligarchs. And each year, they come up with some new way to try to rebrand capitalism, rebrand the thing that has made them as powerful as they are, right, without having to do anything that undermines their power. And I think 2020 they went with a Great Reset because it was a pushback against the populism. They were recognizing that global populism was becoming a genuine threat to them. You and I talked this weekend about Naomi Klein's article in The Intercept. I would recommend everybody read that one. She says that this is not a conspiracy theory. What she says, it's a conspiracy smoothie, because it pulls in everything from the far left and everything from the far right and puts it all under the rubric of the Great Reset, and then gives people a way of thinking about it. But past years had been called, 2012, I think, was the Great Transformation. I forget right. Every year they kind of come up with something that could have spun off into kind of some type of paranoia, but it didn't happen during a global pandemic. And of course, the solutions that they're going to present are all going to just further entrench their own power and kind of distract people from what really needs to be done. Because I think the one problem with this conspiracy thinking here and this focus on the kind of Great Reset as the place where all of this is organized is it allows people to then let people off the hook. Like, Bill Gates actually does have way too much power over global public health, but not because he's trying to inject microchips through a vaccine into your body. Big Pharma has too much power over people's lives. Big Oil actually is driving us to extinction. And it is just a handful of executives who are running these companies. Like these things are all facts. But then if you put them all together in this big conspiracy smoothie, it just becomes disaggregated and impossible for people to formulate a public response to, other than kind of anger culturally at people who then they identify as part of this Great Reset, and the oligarchs just get to continue to hum along.
Well, because a lot of these problems are hard because, look, giving private enterprise more space to have trade and have, less immigration restrictions, creates a lot of good for society, a lot of prosperity, a lot of harmony. We don't want entrenched corporate power that merges or disproportionately influences the public sector and the government power, and you have these merging, and then you get the worst of both worlds. You get the unchecked rapaciousness of the worst aspect of the private sector with the coercive power of the government sector, which is the scary thing, and I think is the thing that the good version of populism is warning us against or is trying to steer clear of. I, as a libertarian, I want to chart that without punishing or hollowing out the private sector to the public sector's benefit, because the government handles a lot of these things worse than the private sector would handle them, or doesn't allocate resources right, or has a million other problems to contend with. But it's important to call out the idea of the Davos kind of elites getting together and trying to plan what society should look like. Obviously, that's going to be to their benefit, not necessarily ours.
Yeah, I mean, who thinks it's a good idea that a bunch of corporate millionaire and billionaires and world leaders getting together and coming up with what's best for we, the little people? I mean, who thinks that that's a really good idea? And who thinks that they are going to be doing it to our benefit? But of course, they're going to frame it like, oh, this is good for you. You're going to rent. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Don't worry about it. So of course this is, now there are some, of course, very fringe conspiracies that maybe have come out from the Great Reset. But the vast majority of people who are like, this is something to be concerned about, are not believing any fringe conspiracies about microchips. They're actually saying, look, this is a problem. Elites getting together and saying that they're going to fix everything. And then when you look at the actual list of partners with the World Economic Forum, they control everything. They control media, they control health, they control business, they control everything. And so then it does become, how do we people fight against that? How do we say, no, we don't want that. We don't like your idea. And we don't want that idea, when they then shove it down our throats and say, no, this is the idea that's good for you. Trust us. Trust the global elites. It's a problem.
No, and I have nostalgia for all of this, because I got into politics because of anti-globalization. When I was in college in the 90s, that was what the left was doing. The anti-globalization movement was on the rise. And there were massive protests at Davos, protests at the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank. And these were supported by third world movements, by environmental movements, and by labor unions, saying that all of this power among this global elite is going to be extraordinarily damaging to the world. It's going to lead to yawning inequality and destruction of the planet's ecosystem. And 20 years later, 25 years later, that is indeed what we've seen fall out from that. But it is falling off the radar and has kind of been replaced by this conspiracy smoothie of the Great Reset.
Although I will say, with the Great Reset, this is one of them, because they do name their meetings. This one, they made a website. They didn't just say, okay, it's the name of our meeting. I mean, they wrote a book.
Right, the book and everything.
They put a website out. This is much more, of their plan than
what's
than
this year's?
Meetings.
Did they label this year's?
I think it's just the Davos agenda but it starts today. And like I said, Xi Jinping is kicking it off. And so, it'll be interesting to kind of pay attention to what they're talking about this week. And then they're going to go to Davos and rub shoulders and elbows with one another in the summer.
Right. Xi Jinping, someone famously concerned about improving human welfare and
promoting independence, individuality, and individual freedom, right?
Yes.
Very big on all of that.
We kid. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Please stay with us.